Marco, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. I'm so glad that one of your agents reached out to me and I listened to your latest album, Chant for Our Planet. It is so cool, and we have a ton of things to talk about. So thanks so much for being a guest on the Everything Saxophone podcast.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Donna. It's really nice to be here.
Yeah, so I'm going to go all over the place because you know what? This is a conversation. We're just going to have a really good time over here. And so the album that I was introduced to is called Chant for Our Planet. And the big thing about this, it's jazz music promoting social change again. So can you talk about that a little bit and the inspiration for this album?
Yeah, this is something that I'm extremely grateful and proud of, because for the first time in my career, I actually had a foundation reaching out to me. And it's a foundation that is not a music foundation. It's actually, it's called the Tallberg Foundation. And the member of the foundation are either politician or scientists or everything in between, of people basically being leader in their field and having an organization that cares to promote, social issues and gives, answers or solutions. And in this case, what happened was that this foundation understood the importance of music and the arts in order to send a message. And I don't know if you remember, but in October last year, there was the World Accord for Social Climate in Glasgow, which was after Paris, the Paris Accord. They all met. And so the foundation wanted to send a musical message during the conference about the importance of, awareness about climate change. And he wanted to change the narrative where, a lot of the narrative about climate change as sort of like a very alarmistic and negative point of view of like complaining, which I think is very important. They wanted to use music to sort of inspire, it's sort of like a call of action using the arts. And I felt, I was doing all this meeting with very, very, powerful, important people. And I was sometimes feeling, wow, they're asking me, a musician, to offer some vision on something that is. And it felt good because, part of what I do as director of the Global Jazz Institute, this is part of our mission. It's about, training students not to just become a great musician, but to become activists through music. And this was such an amazing example of something that is shifting in the narrative, where now they are looking at musicians and artists as somebody that may really send a powerful message. So the foundation hired me to create this project, which initially was called Tallberg Jazz for the Planet. And you can see that in there. There's the old concert live is, on YouTube and on their website. And so in this concert, I had a lot of room to create original music, which would send a message about the state of the affair with climate change. And one of the things that made the thing even more special was that when I hired the musician that I hired, I commissioned to some of them to also create original music, which in turn created a lot of excitement because it's like this idea to create music, to write music for this specific, cause. It's very inspiring for a lot of artists. And so we have John Paritucci wrote this beautiful suite, 3-movement suite. I wrote some music specifically for that. And Joe Lovano wrote that incredible free piece called As It Should Be. And they were really writing specifically for this concert. So in October last year, we recorded this in front of a live audience. We went to the Fraser Studio, which is part of WBGH in Boston, which is one of the best studios. There was this audience, and we recorded this concert. So the record that you hear, the old first take, by the way, that's a concert that then we we sort of took away all the audience, the claps, and kind of made it like a project. And I changed the original name, the Tallberg name for the band was Jazz for the Planet, Tallberg Jazz for the Planet. And I called the CD, the album Chant for Our Planet, because I did not want to repeat the same title they had. And so, but that's basically the history behind it. And it's, again, to me, the fact that it's inspiring to me, and I also talk with a lot of colleagues and a lot with the students, is that it's this idea to reach out or be in search outside of our music environment, which I think is so important, not only because that's where also the real money are. And so they really allow you to do project with from a point of view where you can really start dreaming, okay, who I want to be partaking in this important project to send this important message and what kind of music I want to play. But also because this idea of giving a different image to the whole world of what a musician can do and can be. So sort of stepping out of this entertainment, box that they like so much to put us, and sort of like having a different conversation through our music and as artists about things that are socially relevant, important, because, hey, why not? You know what I'm saying? Why not? I mean, we supposed to be messengers the moment that there's a light on us and we're on a stage. It could be something transcending music, or music using music as a vehicle for the community, whatever that is.
Oh my gosh, for sure. There's so much to unpack here. And, let's face it, one of the statements I said before, jazz music promoting social change, music has always been at the forefront or part of movements. I think about Woodstock, right? What do people remember? Well, first of all, it's a music festival, but hearing that music puts people in that time. Hearing certain music at certain stages, in the world transforms us back to those times. And it's indicative of what, the human struggles were at that time. And I love the fact that the Berklee Global Jazz Music Institute that you're the director for, you're giving students the inspiration to explore these areas and to make music. I love the way you said this, not put it in a box for entertainment purposes, this is so sad to say, but people think of music as background noise for when they're having dinner or parties or whatever, but really putting it at a higher level and how it can impact change, how it can be a part of the change, how it can spur people, inspire them. I think that's incredible.
It is. I think it's important. I think it's the way I look at it is the way we should project the jazz artists in the new millennium. I think that all of the old model are obsolete. The jazz culture is not the same as it was in the 60s and the 70s. And you already see so many examples of this in the 60s and the 70s, right? And for some reason, this is not something that we are teaching the young artists to think like. And so conservatory and music school are this, very academic, strict environment where they talk a lot about technique, a lot about, styles and improvisation and all of this. But this old contest of what this music from the beginning being like a music that has always had a social impact and always had a social, purpose. And I think like if we're a jazz musician and we do not connect to that history, then we're missing an opportunity. But I feel like we need to start training the young generation thinking that way, and stop thinking, oh, I'm going to go to school and then go to New York and trying to get a record deal from Blue Note, and that's how I know I was successful. Man, maybe that was tried in the 20 years ago, but now it's like the sky is the limit. It's like we need to reinvent what a jazz musician is in the new millennium, And these are great examples that people are listening. If you're putting yourself in that direction, people are listening. Again, this is a major international foundation called Tallberg Foundation, originally from Sweden. The director was it's American, it lives here in the United States. He was in Washington at some point. And none of them are musicians, but they understand something that sometimes we don't understand, which is what is the power of music, which is not just to make you be entertained for 10 minutes or an hour. And so I think that's where I hope that we can direct the new generation to start thinking. And that's some of the things we do at the Global Jazz Institute. That's a mission for us. It's this idea of social activism, education, and music, and interconnected education, where you don't teach music in a bubble, but you connect it to everything happening, because music is not in a bubble. There's a reason why bebop sounded the way it sounded. If you think about it, that's not a bubble. It was not just an artistic movement, right? It was a revolution. It was a cultural and social revolution, right? So that's a little bit of the point of view of Chant for Our Planet. That I'm very grateful that I've been asked to basically send a music message during the conference where everybody, all the world is getting together to talk about these issues. And so the video went semi-viral after a month. It's like between all the platforms they showed it, more than 1 million views. And I feel like they really sort of like whatever they invested was a good return for them in terms of what they were trying to do with the concert. And I think that's wonderful. And now this is just my new album, but there's all this history behind that. To me, it's very inspiring to me personally.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions. I hope I don't forget them. So let me ask one question in terms of, let's stick with the album for 1 second. So you wrote on Irene's Path, right? Now, I'm curious about your composition process, but in particular with this project, because it had, this social impact. It had this purpose to it, this singular purpose to it. So what was your composition process like, aside from being inspired, but where did you draw your inspiration from when you wrote that particular piece?
Yeah, that's such a great question also, because Irene Path is a very different kind of composition regarding the kind of music I tend to write. It's very different. I tend to, a lot of my project, especially in the last 5-6 years, I find a lot of inspiration in the theme of love, and theme of love that could be romantic or spiritual. But I feel like that's a source of incredible inspiration for me. So my last 2 CDs, Almas Antiguas and Awakening, that's really totally the point of view. And to me, as a writer, I think myself not as a saxophone player, I think myself as a singer. And so I tend to write compositions that are very melodic, just because I come from that culture. As an Italian musician, we grew up with this obsession with beautiful melodies that can really resonate and can be put to words, by the way. And so usually that's my composition method, and I usually write music on the piano. Irene Path is totally different. I actually wrote it on the saxophone, and thinking about my personal experience of having gone through. That probably Irene was my either 3rd or 4th hurricane that I actually experienced as a person.
Yeah, they're not fun.
The first one being Andrew back in 1991, when I just moved from Italy to Miami to attend the University of Miami. I arrived in August, and I think Andrew came in September, October, and he destroyed the city, and it was just like a nightmare I will never forget. And Irene was not as destructive in my life because I was already in Boston, but I was supposed to play a concert and do some workshop in Honduras. Or was it Guatemala? Actually, it was Guatemala. And we were supposed to leave with a group of musicians from Boston to Guatemala. This hurricane came, and it actually created a huge impact in the economy in the United States because it disrupted a lot of things, including flight. So we could not travel. But I remember this idea of things, like the hurricane. It's this this connection between destruction and calm, and this direction that you never know where it goes, which if you lived in a place where you get hurricane, that's the most stressing thing, because you see this monster arriving, this monster storm arriving, and there are all the projection, but it can change at all moment, right? And so there's this idea of uncertainty, and that's the thing that I try to represent in the song. If you listen to it, there's all these different moments, right? That is just like, I try to create what is this feeling that you sense when a storm coming your way, where you still hope maybe it goes away. And then when it's coming, there's this moment where it's actually calm, there's nothing happened, and then there's total destruction. So in a way, these were the image I was thinking in terms of creating this particular song. I wanted to create this sense of instability and frenziness and having this idea of like this contrast between destruction and calm and everything in between, because the storm really arrives little by little, then it kind of goes around of the ring is where the highest wind are, and then there's the eye of the hurricane, which is totally, you think things are finished, right? It's totally calm. And then here the outer band comes, and you have from total calm to the maximum eye of winds, because again, around the eyes is where the strongest wind are. So I was writing this song in this idea of creating an emotional soundtrack for a hurricane. And that's what I really want. I had in mind. I had in mind an image that I live myself. I've been in a hurricane where just to go back home, I had to walk with water up to my neck. I'm not kidding about, just to go back home. And it was a night, with places where, you could have snake gator around, just because Miami, the snake gator are everywhere.
Oh, God.
And so I lived so many bad moments, with hurricane, that this, in a way, it's about Irene, because it was the last one I experienced. But emotionally, I was very much putting together all my images of what I personally lived. And the thing with Irene was that he totally changed our plan, and it wasn't, I didn't live there as intensely as other, but it still was disrupting everything around what I was supposed to do. And he sort of made this trip going in such a different direction. But anyway, so that's how I wrote that song, and it's really, usually I don't write like that, but maybe I should, if you like this so much.
Yeah, no, I did. And the question that I have in my mind is that this one you wrote on the saxophone, others you said you've written on the piano. So how do you capture, as you're writing it on the saxophone, like I'm just trying to have you like go back to when you wrote it, and like your thought processes, and how are you, let's see, how do I want to word this? I'm trying to say like conveying harmonically, we are melodic, but also conveying harmonically without the use of the piano right away. So like, what were I don't know if you could even tap into this, like what were your thought processes doing this so differently, and, writing it on the saxophone, thinking definitely melodically for sure, but then you have to not transpose this, but, bring this to the level of adding harmonic instruments to it as well.
Yeah, I think it's hard to pinpoint the answer, but everything started with the main line, which harmonically had, probably some sound that I was at that moment exploring with, and harmonic speaking, some altered sound that I was working on the saxophone. But then I had this odd rhythm in time, which I wasn't, I usually, that's not usually where I'm directing myself, but I had somehow the idea of American, the way I was seeing it and living it. It could not have been in a regular, time feel. And so I come out with this very irregular, uh, phrase, and then I like completely counterpoint rhythmically to that. So I sort of heard that as I am imagining this hurricane coming out of the coast of Africa. And that's why I use the Abakwa rhythm, and I use certain call in the drums as to refrain to, okay, this is this wind that comes from this continent toward ours. So there, I was thinking about that connection in my mind. But everything is the way I am. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a theorist. I study all of that, but I don't approach music from that point of view if I can avoid it, because I rather think more cinematographically or emotionally. And so I tend to study things and have it thinking, like marinating in my brain, and trust enough myself to allow the compositional process to come without having the intellect tell me what I should do. And as a matter of fact, when I wrote the song, I actually wrote all this line, and I was thinking rhythmically, and I was thinking all these images and in sounds more than harmonies. And then I wrote a chord progression for the solo section. And when I look at it after the fact, I say, wait a second, what am I doing? That doesn't sound right at all. Like, I'm writing all this free development of this line, and then I put this chord progression. To me, in a way, boxes everything that the song has said so far. So when I presented it, I say the moment we go to the solo, it's going to be completely free, and I wanted to have a conversation with Joe, right? And instead of being my solo or his solo, I wanted to say, well, let's imagine that, okay, now when our solo start, we're in the middle of the storm, right? And so that's when me and Joe plays. Now we went through all the phases of the hurricane coming, and then eating. And then when we start, I wanted to have this frenziness and us playing against each other or within each other. And then the next section is when we go back to the Awakwa rhythm and the mood changes. And that represent, in my mind, the eye of the hurricane, where things kind of calm down again. And out there is Chico playing this beautiful solo. And, the idea of destruction is going, it's sort of like the mood totally changed, just the way it happens in a hurricane, because when you're in the eye of a hurricane, you think everything it's nice, right? And then when that section finish, we go back to the melody, and so hear the destruction again. So that's a little bit how I thought about it. Very different from my process, but I think the key was to create a freedom in the improvisation and just define me and Joe, we're playing in the storm, and Chico and the guitar solo, you're playing it's like now you're back in the eye of the storm. So that the storm is going to hit again, so it cannot be totally calm, but there's a total different, environment. And so that's how it was all thought in this way. So all images of my real experience with hurricanes.
Yeah,
And it,
and that's a great way to draw from when you think about it. But I'm curious though, so when you get to that section, like I'm thinking about how you go to rehearsal and you explain this to your bandmates, like what this is what's going on here, you know what I mean? Like, so are we freely soloing, but is the guitar, are you thinking in, oh gosh, how do I want to word this? Are you thinking in terms of, like I'm going to explore this sound, you may explore this sound, the guitar may explore another sound. Like how do you approach that?
no, it was on images. It's a little bit the way shorter schools. It's like I just said, we're gonna go for destruction. So when we are in this, we're in the midst of the storm, whatever that means for you,
Okay.
And and it is scary because I'm saying it's like a total free improvisation, and this is for a recording for where you have a taking from an audience. So, but I feel maybe that's why that song resonated with you. I don't know, because there is an urgency that, you cannot rehearse. I mean, how can you rehearse that? And that to me was more important, to have that sense of like, okay, we're literally in a freaking hurricane and we can literally get actually completely destroyed by our own self. You know what I'm saying? And it's also like, okay, let's go, so it was nerve-wracking, especially because not in the CD, but in the concert, I started the concert by playing Nature Boy in a very, very open, kind of melancholic way, just saxophone, then guitar, and then we go into this destruction mode, right? And this was within 10 minutes of the concert. And it's a very difficult piece. Technically, we all mess up somehow. And there was actually a question like, should we use this? And I'm thinking, you know what? We should, because it doesn't matter that we messed up. It's that hurricane. Of course we're messing up. So if you're looking for perfection, may not be the perfect track. But it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to depict a hurricane. So it's okay if we're not together. Sometimes we're totally kind of like, because there's the rhythmic grid and what me and Joe play goes so against each other that, when it sounds perfect, it really has an effect. And sometimes you can hear like we kind of deviate a little bit. But the way I hear it is, if we take away our musician perfectionist point of view, there's beauty in imperfection. And I remember reading that Miles would talk about this, where he would never correct a mistake when he was recording because he felt that was part of the process of the music. So there are definitely various mistakes in that track, but I love it too. I think like the energy is the correct one. And literally, Donna, I'm not kidding. The all between the two ads, everything is totally free, totally improvised. So the only thing we agreed was me and Joe are the storm, and Chico and the remix section are the eye of the hurricane.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's great for clarification. And I'm just thinking to myself two things. Art reflects life.
Yeah.
So how perfect is that? And especially with this theme of climate change, where there appear to be more hurricanes and more destructive hurricanes than there have been in the past. So I think this is perfect. But the other thing too is an interesting point here is this. Have you performed that piece? That piece will never be the same when you perform that again. It'll always be different.
Absolutely, just as the piece that Lovano wrote, as it can be, it wouldn't, as it should be. Sorry, it could never be the same. Which, in a way, is what most of the great. I'm not saying that my record is great, but a lot of the jazz that we define as great and that we like to listen as that particular sense of, okay, this is never going to be played the same way, right? So I think a lot of the album is actually that way, but those particular tune, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Which makes it so incredibly interesting when you think about it. And hopefully, when you do perform that again, you do, someone captures a recording, because it'll be very interesting to see this captured recording, this one, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I really hope that we can play that again, but I'm also uh, totally scared to play that song again because it's so difficult. No, it's so difficult. And it's like you can't just be, down on your butt, so easily with that fits. Because, if the improvisation part is free, the ad is not. There's a lot of stuff that are written against each other, and rhythmically there's all this rhythmic counterpoint that is very, very difficult even for this kind of group. I'll be honest, like we had to rehearse this piece because it was not coming. It was really difficult. So I hope to play it again, but I would need to practice a lot more.
And listen, and that is so inspiring for us mere mortals. And for a lot of us listeners, for this podcast and whatnot, to hear that, because, well, let's think about it this way. And I didn't get a chance to listen to the album Awakening, but, with the songs that are on there, and they followed your, your themes of like romanticism and love and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
totally different, right?
Yes.
So here's a question that some listeners may have, the approach to the songs on that album, how much, it's obviously not going to be the level of practicing that you would need for this particular piece in specifically, but, I guess a listener would want to know, like, how much do you, rehearse your pieces with your group, and, how does that work out and all that kind of stuff?
Well, that's a great question, Donna. And both of these new projects, so Awakening came out in April, and Chant for Our Planet just came out last week. And both of them are two are two projects where I put myself in this really crazy situation of being very under rehearsed and recording live. And it's beautiful because it's just, I've been living for the last 14 years next to the influence of Danilo Perez, who is the artistic director of the Global Jazz Institute. And Danilo, as you know, is been the piano piano chair in Wayne Shorter Quartet for the last, 11, no, I think even more. And so a lot of the philosophy that I got from Wayne through Danilo, or from Danilo and Wayne, is about this idea of you cannot rehearse the unknown. And so to put yourself in a situation of vulnerability where you understand that you want to leave a lot of room for real improvisation, which is the act of, actually, we call it comprovisation, because we are not just, you say improvisation, there's be this this sense that you're not prepared, you're just doing whatever. But no, it's more like you're you're composing in the moment, and to leave ample space for the moment to let you know in which direction you go, and be open to it as a group, not just as a musician. And so Awakening as a crazy story behind, because that's another project which I don't even know where I got the nerve to do that. But basically what happened was that during COVID, I was asked by the Italian council to put together a project, and I did. One of the projects that I'm mostly proud of, which is I put a group of string and jazz quartet. It was the quartet, string quartet from the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Then I had this incredible band, John Paritucci on bass, Adam Cruz on drums, and Alan Pasqua on piano. And the idea was to do old Napolitan love songs, but into this classic and jazz sound. and John wrote all this arrangement, and this concert is so beautiful. I mean, it's to me, it's like, because it's all this love song, and there's always this sense of longing, and there's always somebody suffering, and it's something that is not resolved, and there's always this angst. And I feel like as a musician, there's so much to hold on to that as an expression, and this passion. And it's like, I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. And plus, these songs are beautiful, and they're now well known because they're all songs from, the end of the beginning of last century. Some are even from the century before, and so they're part of our repertoire of a culture that is not as known. They're definitely not the Napolitan song you hear in the United States by most of the immigration here. And when I send the original music to all the musicians, they all fall in love with it. Like, man, this is like the Italian blues. And I was thinking, wow, that's right. That's the Italian blues, right? It's a very similar sentiment, right? So anyway, long story short, we did this live concert again. It was, no audience because it was COVID, but it came out beautiful, and a lot of people noticed. And Jazz Boston is an organization here in Boston that now I'm in the board of advisor. But they saw this concert and they contacted me and said, like, man, this thing you played was, it was something like we never heard something like that specifically. Would you like to do another concert for our organization? It's going to be a live stream. And I say, sure. And I start thinking, sure, I love to do that. And then the lady says, by the way, I went to your website, and I noticed that you write poems. Now, Donna, I do write poems, and I also take photography, but I don't consider myself a poet nor a photographer. So if you go to my website, you have to really go to the last tab, to see my poem and my photography. But this woman did. And she said, I really love your poems. And
that's awesome.
Have you ever thought about doing something with music and poetry? And it's like when somebody hit you with like a hammer, and was like, what? How can I never thought about it, right? Like, I do both, right? Why I never thought about putting them together? So I said to her, wow, her name is CJ. I said, CJ, just like, it's so obvious, and yet I never thought about it. So I started thinking about this, and I said, what if I create a musical play, right? Hear me out. Because when I was looking at this, I don't remember in COVID, you see concert, you see the musician talking to an audience that is there, and like, man, I don't want to do that. Like, it seems so contrived, So I say, what if I create a play where with a month, and then I start creating a theme which is about love, and it's about loss, and it's about awakening, and it's about refining yourself, and use my poem and use the music as a soundtrack to my poem. So basically, if you go and look at the concert, we start with a monologue, and for an hour we play uninterruptedly, and we use the poems either embedded in the music or as a transition, and all the transition are all improvised. I have selected a number of songs for the first time, songs that are original but also pop song. Like, I got obsessed with the song called Alone Again Naturally, which is a cheesy song from the 70s, which, nobody knows anymore. But in the 70s was a huge pop song. And when I heard it, in the 70s original, it's like, man, there's something about this song that the words are so deep, because this person is basically lost everything. But here it's like this pop song that, with an orchestra, and it's like, and I thought, but this is an amazing song. So I use a lot of material like that, like Because by the Beatles. The word starts, because the world is round, it makes me cry. And just that line, it's just like, how deep is that, right? And these all lyrical melodies, that to me are spoke so much, but I wanted to create, taking them out of their context, put them into this play where poetry sort of like create this narration and music punctuated. And with three singers, two real singers, and me as a saxophone player, trying to play as a singer. Very intentional, so just kind of like be very melodic and very thematic and very related to the emotion of the songs. So when the album came, of course, the label said, "No, you cannot put it together the way as the concert. You're gonna have to cut every song. Everything has to be." And so the record became a different thing. I had to change the storyline in my head. So before the play started from bright to dark, where actually from dark to bright, and then I sort of had to change it for the record. But that's the thing I'm thinking. I'm thinking about what is the story behind. So Awakening was, we rehearsed a couple of hours the night before, and then we went to the sound check, and Kenny Werner was like, "So Marco, what was this about? I can't remember. Where do I go?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, the old band, they don't know what's going on. It's like we're gonna be live, in the old world. I'm crazy, and here I'm putting my poems out, and here I'm playing alto, which I never played like in 11 years now. I'm playing alto, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a disaster." Right. So I had to add like a couple of Chardonnay, and then I say, "You know what, I'm ready. All right, let's go." And then the whole thing, wow, it was just like incredible, because of course we got lost, but when we got lost, we found each other. And to me, those are the best part of the album. It's just like when we didn't know the hell was going on, and we sort of made sense because there was such a theme. You know what I'm saying? Like it was so intentionally narrated in a certain way that people, the musician, knew what the story was about, knew it was about love and expression, and knew we had to be in the moment because, there's all these poems that Nadia is reciting, and then we go into this transition that are all live, all improvised, then we stumble into the song, and then we go to the next, and hopefully we get to the end, right? Where we start super dark and we finish with this gospel version of Stand By Me, which is a song I would never have played before. But then I heard Devon singing it as a gospel tune. I'm like, holy monkey, that's incredible. And I wanted to end with that note. And so Kenny started singing. It was just like crazy, But if I think about it, everything could have, all the things that could have gone wrong, it could have been like a total disaster, But I feel like I gain a lot of trust in following a spirit that goes so far beyond who we are and our capability as a musician. And I really like that, because it's like you become comfortable in being very uncomfortable, and because you realize that in those moments where the most uncomfortable you are, the truer you are to what you do, because you only have your ear as a guide, and so you really need to be present. You cannot relate on a chart, or you just have to listen and be like reacting in the moment. And I feel that's what I learned from Danilo and from, Wayne Short School. Of course, my music is very different, but that spirit, I sort of becoming something that I'm getting when things become too rehearsed and too pre-planned. I start feeling like, I don't like it anymore. It's just like, no, that doesn't feel like jazz to me anymore.
Wow, this is so incredibly interesting, and such funny stories with this. But the question that comes to mind, okay, listen, you're like A++ level pros, all this kind of thing. When you're in that moment of you're all not knowing what's going on and all that kind of stuff, two questions are going to come out of this. Number one, what are you feeling at that moment? Are you feeling panicked? And then the second thing would be, think about many listeners of this podcast are not at your level of playing. And so, like for them, those kinds of things that happen, where you're on stage and you're like, oh my God, what's going on? We're all lost. What would you advise those students when those types of moments happen?
It's terrifying, Donna.
Okay, so
It is. I mean, I'm telling you, when we did the sound check, I'm not kidding you. It's like, man, this is gonna be, I can't believe like my career is gonna end tonight. Like I was like, I just got this sense of doom. It's like, what was I thinking? How could I pull all this off with couple hour rehearsal the day before? And there's all this thing where we move from song to song with 3 parts and poems that she has to recite that we need to react to. And so I was terrified, and I'm not kidding. We went to dinner. I got 2 Chardonnay, and then I came back in the studio, and I said, I mean, it's like falling in love. It's like, isn't that terrifying? Isn't that the most terrifying thought, that you release everything you are into the hands of another human being, and hope for the best, and all is unplanned, but you have this feeling about this person, and you have this feeling about your destiny and the life you're writing for yourself with this other person. I think that's why I feel love is such a great theme artistically, because it could be like this torture or this agony or this bliss, and you just have to release yourself. So I feel that as human being, we want to control everything, when nature tells us that we have to release everything to really being part of something. And once you see yourself as part of something that is bigger than you, and you're not guiding, then you just start trusting that whatever spirit is guiding you is not going to make you fall on your butt. And if you fall on your butt, it's because you're supposed to fall on your butt. And there's something in that there's also a lesson where you can turn that into a different outcome. And so it's just how you look at it. It's like, why, and Kenny is such a master of this philosophy, because it's like, why you talk to a musician or a young artist, say, well, why are you so afraid to make mistakes? This is not brain surgery, right? If you make a mistake, nobody's gonna die. So if you're so preoccupied, it's just because it's all your freaking ego. It's your ego that you want to sound good, you want to be validated, and so that becomes the objective of your art, and then it guides the way you play it. But what if you put your ego away and you create a scenario where you have something to say, and then release the control to the moment. You trust the musician you ask, because of course you need to trust the music that you select. I cannot play this way with anybody, right? You need to have musicians that resonate with this spirit, and in that moment of truth, they're there with you.
And you have to have a tech. You also, the other thing too, though, you have to have a certain level of technique, to.
Yeah, you. I mean, I don't feel like I do, but I've been studying all my life. So I'm saying, like this is one of the things as a jazz musician. Unfortunately, you cannot get away, and you're never good enough. I remember I was talking the other day with Danilo. I was telling the story where I met backstage Michael Brecker. This is a true story. I was just a student. I went to, he was playing in Chicago, and I went to with my mentor, which were part of with Michael of the loft scene in New York. And here I heard this concert where Michael played like all the note of the universe. I mean, like the thing he was doing in the saxophone was just like insane, from a technical point of view. Like you could not imagine somebody playing more saxophone than that, which I don't necessarily resonate with. But from a point of, as a saxophone player, I'm like, man, this is insane. Like the way he played this horn is just incredible. And then we're outside in the green room, and my mentor says, man, Mike, you sounded so great. And here's Mike. I'm not kidding. As he's down down and he's shaking on and saying, no, man, I have so much to practice. Oh my gosh, I have so much. And I'm thinking as a young student, I'm looking at him and like, what? Because it wasn't like false modesty, like somebody, oh no, hey, no, he was really upset with himself. He was really not happy. And he kept on moving. It's like, no, man, I need to practice more. I was like, well, if you need to practice more, what am I supposed to do? It was actually discouraging because it's like, man, if you can play it that way and you feel you need to practice more, like, what does that mean for all of us?
And think about that. So now people listening to this right now are going to have the same question of you. You know what I mean? So,
But at the end of the day, it's like, well, that was not a good thing yet. And a lot of the musicians that really loved him and appreciated him, they say he had, he didn't mention that as a positive of what he was bringing, but on the other hand, he made him obsessed about practicing. So in a way, how can you justify somebody playing like that? It's because he's obsessed with practicing. And so he turns into a negative thing into a positive thing, because then he was a virtuoso. But I don't know how much he owned emotionally about what he actually was achieving. And that moment he seemed he was really unhappy with himself. And then I asked a lot of musicians and say, oh yeah, that was Mike. So I don't feel that's healthy. And I feel like we need to find healthier way to, as a musician, to live with who we are and our capability, and push that to the limit, understanding that that's all we need to be doing. It's like become the best version of ourselves, and not necessarily measuring ourselves against Coltrane or Michael Brecker or Joe Lovano, all this, because how can you, you just lost from the beginning,
yeah. So let me ask you something, because this question or this comment always comes up. People always, mention this. People will say, oh, well, jazz musician, improvisation, you either have it or you don't. It's like this gift from the gods, so to speak. Now, of course, I know the answer. It's, of course not. It's a skill that you attain. But many people truly feel that. I don't think they're just saying it, but I think they truly feel that they just, they don't have that gift. You either have it or you don't. And I don't think you encounter students like that when when they're at Berklee or that kind of thing, because they wouldn't be there as students. But have you ever had people, say that to you, mention that to you, and how would you react to that?
Well, first of all, what you say is not exactly true. Actually, every year we select 20 of the most talented students around the world. We have this program, master program, where we give full scholarship to 20 students every year to complete the master. And Donna, you'll be surprised. You get these incredibly young, talented students, and you see how insecure they are about what they are. And after all this year, I can recognize it just in their look, and I call it the imposter syndrome, where I could see that on the first day they come in and we're doing the keynote speech and then welcome them. I could see who suffer from that. And I can see they're thinking, man, they made a mistake and they're gonna realize I'm not that good, And so what I do, I that's exactly what I say. That the first thing I say to them is like, I can see from your eyes that some of you think we made a mistake, but we haven't made a mistake. And then I explain why we have made a mistake. So I think it's actually so much part of the dysfunctionality of what we become by studying this music, but it has nothing to do with the music. It has to do with the environment where we study that make us feel this way. That's the way I feel. I teach a performance pedagogy course for the graduate students, and I talk a lot about this because I feel we can change this, and I see them as the future teachers, that they're going to be great. They're already great musicians. They're probably going to have great career, and they're going to be influencing a lot of people. And we need to stop to create this, this sense of complex in our students, where they're not good enough, and we're never going to amount to what the greats did, and we have nothing to offer as a person. We only can replicate, and we only can transcribe, and nothing is never enough. I think we create that, I think it's a lot in the pedagogy of jazz schools, which I do not subscribe. There's not enough encouragement, and there's not enough stress in what you bring as a person. And I think that's the biggest mistake we do as jazz pedagogy, where we need to allow people to bring who they are, which means if you're from Italy, then whatever that means for you is important in your music. If you're in Japan, whatever that means culture is important in your music. And it doesn't matter if your music doesn't sound like American jazz. It's actually a good thing, And if you come from Ghana, that should be in your music. Whatever you come from, whoever you are, that's your story. Because I can never be playing like Coltrane ever, even if I try, and all the people that try, at the end they just become a bad version of Coltrane. But why? I mean, Coltrane wasn't playing, he was playing who he was. So I think that's what we need to change. Is just empower a different kind of relationship with the music, where we don't feel like this total imposter all the time. Because Donna, this is not just people that are just beginning. I see professionals suffering from the same thing all the time.
And a part of that
Do you
can
follow what I'm saying?
oh, absolutely. Oh God, sure. I think we all have that in us. And what I think makes it worse today in 2022 compared to the year 2000 or even 1995, before the internet was so popular. But it's having the world at your fingertips, literally having the world at your fingertips through the internet, and having immediate instant feedback and critique, and some of the critique not warranted. I think that's what feeds a lot into this as well.
Absolutely. That is an amazing point, Donna. And not only that, but also the fact that I can just open Instagram right now and scroll through my page and hear 5 amazing 15-year-old saxophone player, maybe in some corner of the world. And I imagine being 15 and having that to my face every time it must be terrifying. How can you not feel you're an imposter when you have an access of all of this content that sometimes is, from a technical point, might be incredible. I mean, we run a nice school program at the Newport Jazz Festival for 5 years as a Global Jazz Institute. Donna, I can tell you, these high school students that we used to audition and enter, they were just incredibly, from an instrumental, like, how can you be 15 and play like that? Like, the level of technical level has went so high with the access of internet, but it doesn't mean that the quality is all good, and it doesn't mean that everything you hear is great. Maybe it sounds great, but you hear like 1 minute, right? Okay, now put out a record and make something meaningful out of your art. Now that's a different thing, And so, I see, for instance, all the jazz musicians that want to burn, and I decide I'd rather melt, right? And that's my point of view. I don't want to burn. I want to melt. And when I play, I want people to feel something that is not just this, hormone, macho energy. And I don't resonate with that. And I feel okay in my life now to say, this is my story. This is what I want to talk about. And these are the musicians I want to play. And this is what inspires me. And everything that I talk as a story, and it's personal, it's autobiographical, or it's for something that I really, really care, like Chant for our planet, and that's, to me, the way we all should be teaching the student to think about. as they're learning from the master, just to understand who they are and not just become another proficient musician. There's too many of that.
And
I mean, that's what I think.
well, no, and I mean, I think that's incredible, and I think a lot more younger, and not even just younger, but more beginner and even intermediate level jazz musicians need to hear, because it is daunting. You go through your Instagram feed or you go through Facebook feed and you hear all these people, putting on their best face, so to speak. There's very few people that, and I applaud them, that have the courage to put up their playing in certain Facebook groups and stuff like that. Hey, I'm working on this. What do you think? I think that's awesome that they do that. But, it's daunting and it's discouraging, to people. And here's the thing too with that, in the culture that the kids are growing up today, where that's all they see. How do you teach? How do you teach these kids to bring out their own story and to bring out emotion where all they're hearing is technicality and technique?
You have to give them permission. It's incredible. It's incredible. They just have to hear from a mentor that you are supposed to tell your own story. I'm gonna make you I'm gonna tell you a real story that happened with Lovano. So we had this incredibly talented young saxophone player that now is actually part of the faculty. It's one of the most inspiring young talent. But he was so enamored with Joe Lovano that not only he was able to recreate or imitate his way of playing, but he got so much into the process of transcribing Lovano that he was also transcribing the way he played physically. So when you would see him play, you could see like a young Lovano, because he moved like that. And I remember Dave Douglas coming to the program and working with him and coming to me and said, Marco, what? It's like this kid, not just to sound like Joe. He moved like him. It's uncanny, right? And then the student had an opportunity to have a one-on-one lesson with Joe. And Joe said, okay, play. And he started playing. And Joe stopped and said, bro, you're telling my story. What's your story? What is your story? Don't tell my story. That's my story. What is your story? And that may be the most important lesson is really inspiring young artists. And because imagine if Lovano say, oh man, great. Oh, you sound like me, beautiful. And he said, well, that's not what you're supposed to do. Who are you? Who is, what's your story? And so as we learn from the past, it's like that's what Wayne says, like the past is the flashlight for the future, which means that you use your past, but you need to look in front, and in front, who else is there than yourself? I mean, who else can you be but being yourself? Now, maybe people don't care, maybe the world don't care, but bro, you selected jazz, so that goes, from the beginning. The world doesn't care that if you're a jazz musician, you're like 1% of the music industry. So right there, why you're trying to validate yourself by being who you're not? But it's not because we want to, it's because we're trained to think that way. If you go to any jazz program, somebody play like Dexter, everybody start like, yeah, I play like Dexter. Well, that's not necessarily a good thing. It's great that you study Dexter, right? It doesn't mean you have to play that way. You just get all of this to start figuring out who you are. And if you don't do that, then, I don't know. Maybe you should not play jazz. Maybe you should have played pop or something else. I don't know. But what I'm saying is, like, all the people that I like to listen, that are either dead or alive, they have something that is unique in their approach. And their voice, there is their voice, and you can recognize, and they're not just jazz musicians. There's musicians to me that don't play jazz that are more of a jazz spirit than jazz musicians that play jazz and they sound like everybody else. That's to me. Sometimes I hear people like, man, these people are really going out there, and there's something about their expression that is not in our aesthetic, but I feel the spirit is there. And I think that it's funny. I was talking with my student about this yesterday. If you look about what is some of the, we were distinguishing about values that are community-based values and individual values, right? So what are the community values that are inherent in the jazz tradition? Well, we start talking about, okay, what could are the things that doesn't matter what branch, everybody sort of like really value that as a community. Well, look at it from the beginning is being individuality and creativity, right? How many jazz programs teach that? You see, and these are community value, right? Meaning a community value we define as something that a community define as positive or negative, right? Which is different from saying, well, I like this artist, but I really don't like this artist. That's a very individual point of view, right? So as a teacher, if I say, well, I really don't care, for Frank Mobley, because even Miles said that he was boring. Man, that's very individual, right? That's actually that you shouldn't say that, because you're sort of like imposing your own taste on your student and immediately put this art into a box. But it's very individual. There's a lot of people that actually love the way he played and doesn't feel that way, and he fits a lot of community values, right? So a community value is something that we all agree. And I mean, if I look at the history of jazz, everybody that is someone is as an individuality, even if maybe it's not an innovator, like Stan Getz was not an innovator, but man, he had a sound. Man, he had an approach. You can recognize him in 5 notes, not even 3 notes, right? There's a lot of people who were not necessarily innovator, like they were not pushing the boundary of the music, but they at least had creativity and individuality, like they were telling their own story. So to me, as a field, as a community, we need to sort of reconnect with the community values of the history of this music, but then project them in the future, not in the past. Because the moment you project in the past, then you deny the spirit of the music, which is creativity, innovation, plus the old, the old cultural expression that comes from Africa, and then it comes to the new world, and then becomes this global expression. But it's not a style of music. It's a cultural movement, and it's a political movement, and it's a social movement, and it's not a style. And we teach it as a style.
That's true. That's very true. That's very true.
I talked about Donna, I'm sorry.
No. This is great. Let me just get rid of this one thing on my screen. No, that's so interesting. That's such an interesting aspect, and that kind of brings it full circle to, what we started with, where jazz is a music that is bringing social change, is on the cusp of it, or is a part of it, or helps to bring it, bring feeling to cultural movements and stuff like that. That's so incredibly inspiring and full circle when you think about it. Now, I'm curious too, though, and I know people are going to be curious as well, in terms of your experiences that shaped you as a musician growing up. Who were your early mentors?
So, the people that I studied with, you mean?
It could be people that you studied with, but also people that, as well as people that inspired you.
Yeah. So I feel like that when I think about my mentor I think when I hear Stan Getz, I feel he was my mentor, even if I never met him. I saw him playing one time, but I feel this connection with something that I've heard in his music that he never left. And the reason why I play the saxophone today is because I heard something in his sound and in his approach that stayed with me. So I never had an opportunity to talk to him about anything, but I feel like a spiritual mentor, I would definitely put Stan Getz as this source of, unending inspiration that I have, and at the same time, I'm really trying not to sound like him, because then it would be. But there's something about his expression that it maybe because I feel like I like this idea of the saxophone player being a singer, and I felt like everything he would play, it would be like there was this vocal quality that to me was very fascinating. But my mentor, my first real mentor in terms of somebody that really shaped my musical aesthetic has been Eddie Gomez, because I played in his band for 10 years. And when I met him, I was still sort of like extremely immature artistically, and finding a lot of answers. And I felt like through having this master so close to me and relate with him musically, and relate with him, around food and travel, it taught me so much about something that before I wasn't clear, because a lot of the information I had about jazz I got in school, and then I realized that it's not that information I had in school was wrong. It was just not how these artists learned it, and that's not how they thought about it. And that to me was a trauma. I almost felt like calling the university, say, hey, I want my money back, What the hell you guys told me, what I'm saying? And so now I'm trying not to be that kind of teacher, because I really felt a total disconnection when I started working with artists of that caliber, of how they look at, the same thing, such a different point of view, that I felt like, okay, it's not that what the school taught me is wrong, because you can analyze it that way, but it's a post-codification in a way where you organize material so you can teach it in a semester, into a classroom. And so that's why they present it like that. But that's not at all how this master learn it. That's not how they hear it, and that's not how they think about it. And to me, that was a big lesson, because most of my knowledge came from school, and I was being in very good school. I mean, I was at the University of Miami, and I studied, with great, amazing musicians. But here, I had access a pre-college, a pre-jazz college artist, major artist that learned the music when the music was part of the development of the music. Eddie Gomez played 10 years in the Bill Evans trio. Then he was part of the, Return for, all the group that he did. Like, some of this music was made history. So I had access about the way Bill Evans looked at his own composition through Eddie. And I had access to that aesthetic, that sensibility, those set of community values that were completely different from everything I learned in school. And to me, that when somebody asked me, who was your mentor? I say Eddie, because Eddie was the first person. And now all these artists around me, I consider them my mentors, and they all share the same thing. Then none of them look at music the way I was taught at school in an improvisation course. None of them. It's just like, it's mind-boggling. So I don't want to put down too much the system, but that's been my experience, and to be close to the source that way, I could see how much restructuring we need to do to our curriculums, and regain, an Afrocentric perspective of the music, and regain a mentoring relationship with the student, and create more opportunity to learn on real stages, and not necessarily just in classroom. And I think that's what we need to recreate the curriculums. That's what we're trying to do here. Our program. It's just like, let's tell a different story. Let's tell a story that's closer to how these artists used to learn, which was by playing with other mentors, older mentors, by being in these groups, by learning a repertoire, by, by being mentored by great artists and not by sitting, into a classroom, analyzing giant step, which there's nothing bad with that, by the way. I'm not saying, but it becomes limiting when that's all you do and you don't have access to a sort of bigger understanding of the cultural elements that this music brings, and then the surface in the music, and cannot be analyzed in a theory class, because nothing to do with that. Even if you can codify it that way, you can codify that. Yeah, well, an alto scale is a melodic minor scale starting off at, okay, but they don't think it about that way. I mean, it's incorrect. No, you can't explain it that it's all melodic minor, right? But that doesn't mean that you hear what they're hearing, because they didn't learn it that way. Right. They probably don't even know they're playing an alto scale. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I'm trying to talk about.
Yeah, it's like they're exploring sounds.
Right. That's the thing I wish I knew when I was in my early 20s, because that's not how I was taught at all.
Yeah, and I think, but I think most people weren't really taught that way. When you think about it, we, some people. Okay, so I was taught in schools and that kind of thing. So I get it, and I know that theory is a way of codifying what people did. Whether it was classical, whether it was jazz, or nowadays now even people studying pop music and all that kind of thing. But oh gosh, this would be a total paradigm shift in terms of ways to teach. I mean, I do think you have to build a foundation. I do think you have to absolutely build a foundation, for sure. And then it's going to be, I love what you said about finding your own story, and finding a way to bring that out.
Yeah. And I'm not, it would be easy to say, oh, Marco said it's not important to study theory. I'm not saying that at all.
No,
I'm saying that, when you look at the history of music education, there is, you can find out of even century before, there's a lot of different theories on how you have to teach music. But most of the theory agree on one important factor, which is sound before symbol, which means when you teach music, you should expose the student to absorb music, not from an intellectual point before. It should be exposed, written, from a body, vocal, ear. It should be like a whole non-intellectual experience, and sound before symbol, and then codify once the sound is internalized, when the processes are already kind of like inside. Then you start saying, okay, well, you can look at this way, you can analyze this way. But what we do now in conservatory, we do symbol before sound. So we teach stuff intellectually before people can even hear what they're saying. So when they're playing, they're not hearing, they're thinking about what chord and scale they have to match, and that's so not how this master learn. You know what I'm saying? So I do feel like theory and harmony need to be explored, because they can really stretch your ear and can stretch your palette of expression. But they could not be an education that is intellectually based when music is an oral form. So it doesn't matter how much I can hold the scale and chord in the world and can not be able to play anything that makes any sense or make anybody feel anything. That's my point.
Yeah, no, it's powerful. It's definitely powerful for sure. And it's also, you could relate this back to how many people who have studied music in schools were taught to read and play at the same time, as opposed to experiencing music, first, and then codifying it, to understand what you've heard. So this way you could, then, go further. So absolutely.
But Donna, think about when you're a little kid and you go to kindergarten and you had 3 years of learning how to speak just by ear, and then you go to school and they start saying, okay, well, this is the rule, or this is the grammar. But you already have the language inside your head, right? And then by studying that way, then you start kind of like expanding your vocabulary, blah, blah, blah. But imagine learning, that's the problem when you learn a new language, that you go and buy a book and it's like,
No,
and
you
it's like,
gotta listen to it. Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? And I think there's a lot of similarity. I mean, they say music is a language. There's people that do not agree with that, but whatever you think about, music has an oral component that you cannot do without. You see, like all the theory and harmony knowledge you have is never gonna replace what your ears. And as a matter of fact, Danilo says, your ear is your instrument. It's not the saxophone. Your ear is the instrument. The saxophone or the piano is just like an extension of what you hear, And so I feel like we need to go back to an education that put the emphasis in the right order, which is not symbol before sound, it's sound before symbol. And that's how they learn the music, by listening, right? And by really absorbing that. And then I'm sure most of the big ones were really studying harmony because they had to expand their knowledge and their palette of expression, but they could hear the music. You know what I'm saying? They could hear it. And so they reacted very differently from a point of view of being in a group playing music. And I never was taught that way. Never.
I was going to ask you what your experience was growing up. So when did you start playing instruments and how were you taught?
I come from Italy, which, it's an amazing country, but talk about being traditional education where everything is, teacher based, there's no idea of constructivism where, people explore things and find things like, in my culture, the teacher is the authority, the student is is the empty vessel, and it needs to be kind of get all the notions, and that's how they teach music. It's the same thing. I still remember my first saxophone lesson. The teacher opened the book and he said, well, this is a C, and this is how you play. And so you kind of start creating a motor visual relationship. The ear is not even like, and you start like, oh, C, oh, B, or A, or G, and then you start associating with a symbol. Meanwhile, your ear can be totally not listening to anything, and still you're play notes, right? Because you're sort of like reacting to a visual stimulus with a motor, response, right? So you create you're conditioning yourself by seeing a symbol to have a reaction. Doesn't mean you're necessarily hearing very well what you're doing, right? So they totally bypass the ear. Now, why are classical musicians terrified to improvise? Well, that's a great question. Why? Because that's how they learn to play music. Take away the music, a lot of them they cannot play Happy Birthday. That's so sad because a lot of them may have been having incredible potential to not play jazz but be improviser. You don't have to be an improviser to you can improvise in any styles. But why there's this this fear? Well, because they were taught that way. So it's just like it's all mechanical. You know what I'm saying? And I'm vastly generalizing because I'm sure there's incredibly talented classical musicians that do not play like this. But for the most part, this is what the conservatory creates, that kind of musician, right? Where a lot of proficiency in reading, technical proficiency, and can they hear, cannot they hear? Who cares? Can they improvise? Who cares? Can they recognize? Who cares? You know what I'm saying? No,
oh yeah, I do definitely know what you're saying. That was my experience.
Now, right? But you see, now you treat the same with the jazz musician, that all our thing is, okay, at least they can justify, say, well, this is how you get a gig in a symphony, you have to be the incredible reader and blah blah blah. But with jazz musician, I mean, if we don't have our ear, what do we have?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, that's true.
I
That's
mean,
true.
and so it's such a disservice to me to teach in any other way that is not following what all the pedagogical musical theory teaches. Sound before symbol. Have the student dance, have the student sing, have the student clap, have the student like kind of like just be absorbing music and react from uh, you know from bodily oral point of view before you start introducing all this idea of all of these paradigms of improvisation, what they call it, approaches. you know, I don't know. I mean, that's what I think that when I talk with the artists of the people that I like to listen to, they never look at it that way. Never.
Yeah, it's so different. And I'm curious for you, since your background sounds very similar to mine, when did you, and I can't really say break free, but when did you start studying improvisation? And what was that approach like the way you were taught classically, where you were reading, or yeah,
Absolutely.
same thing?
It was well, it was the same thing, and I I started. I really was in love with jazz the moment I heard Stan Getz, and then I started kind of discovering all the other artists. Went to Charlie Parker, and then I was just like immersing myself with the music, but I did not know anything about how to learn this music. And because I was coming from a very academic culture, which is the Italian culture is very academic, and there's a reason why. Then when I was approached like that from a musical standpoint, it seemed normal. Like I did not have any criteria to say this is not how I should be learning this. I thought I had to understand before I had to hear, which is so, I don't want to say a bad word, but it's screwed up. Okay, I got it. It's so screwed up. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, man, no, no. And so I felt like my whole career, I felt like I was going against time, like trying to recuperate the stuff that where I was being taught in such a non-efficient way. And that's why, to me, teaching this course, I take it so personally, because I feel like it's so easy to change. It's a paradigm that is so easy to change. And it just takes to study a little bit, just read some book about music education, see all of the research that has been done. I mean, this is now it's not my opinion. I'm citing, the most important pedagogy in music are orally based at the beginning, and then they start progressing by, studying, theory, technique, and everything. But the first experience, if you don't have that, and you're gonna miss it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, like you said, it's like catching up. And one thing that I usually point out, I have a certification in music learning theory, Dr. Edwin Gordon. This is exactly what he talks about.
And Gordon was somebody that invented the term audiation.
That's
which
right.
Is like, it's like, what do you mean? Well, you need to be able to hear in your ear before,
right.
without any instrument, without any reference. It's like, okay, let's audiate happy birthday to you. Okay, let's do it. 1, 2, 3. I can hear in my ear. I can hear it. Like
Yeah,
I can hear it. And he says, well, that's how you should be able to hear any music.
Yeah.
It's like this internal listening. And of course, yeah, it was, I don't know how well of a jazz musician was, but it was definitely coming from a jazz part, it was right.
He played bass with Gene Krupa, so.
So he was pretty good.
Yes.
But he is one of the newer pedagogue that he's talking about, even invented the term audiation, his ability to your inner ear to recognize, sound and hear it in your ear without having to play. I mean, can you do that with everything? I still cannot do it with everything. I mean, I work on it,
Yeah.
but that's such a you see, to me, that's such a more meaningful way of teaching music. Like that's a skill to teach, how to audiate, how to develop that kind of inner ear where you hear in your ear. It's music without a point of reference. Just like you hear "Happy Birthday" to you.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing for a long time, and I could tell you, I wish I was trained that way. And in fact, with my podcast episode with Alexa Tarantino, she was trained that way. That's why she can scat bebop, because like she went to, what was it, Juilliard at first. She was taking courses, I think it was at Juilliard or Eastman, I forget, but she was shocked at how people couldn't hear what she heard in her head. Because that was and I was like, yeah,
Right.
well, I wish I had the training that, I had gotten certification in way after my bachelor's and while I was getting my master's. You know what I mean? I wish I would train that way, or else I'd be a totally different person,
Me too. Me too. Me too. And when I see most of the master around me, I realize that that's a step they did not miss. They all had some part of their training. It was totally based on oral
Stimulation, all stimulation.
and then they keep on studying like crazy. But the point is that step was not lost on them.
Yeah, because it's how you learn. I always use this analogy, like learning a second language. We referred to this before. You're not going to read it. You have to hear it. You have to hear it spoken, because what you see on the page is not what you hear people speaking. And just like with jazz, you see lead sheets. You don't see music. You see lead sheets. That's not how people perform it.
Right. Exactly. And that's why there's people like Danilo that he doesn't write lead sheet. He either write everything or doesn't write anything, but he would just put all the voicing, or give you like all piano voicing, and you have to realize what is the harmony. It's like, okay, wait, I need a piano, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In a way, that's why, the real book we're calling fake book, because in a way you are faking. Right?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Think about that. Okay. Yeah.
It's like you're sort of on a surface level of what the composition is really about.
Yeah.
And then we learn how to write music that way, And so, it's a whole culture, but I think that when you have access to people that come from a generation that were not learning music this way, take the time to listen to them, because they have a lot of insights that are incredible. I was really upset once I realized that. I really thought that my education did not serve me as well as it could have, for how much expensive it was. You know what I'm saying? I left everything, and then I realized that, this was sort of an interpretation of the truths, but it's not actually what jazz musicians that I love to listen and that were part of the history of music. That's not how they learn it. I was like, okay.
But there's a couple of things with this too, and a lot of that has to do with, like, I've taught in public schools for a long time, and the thing is that there's so much pressure on you to produce a product. And so, in like the 50s and the 40s, this is where all these band methods came to pass, Breezy and Rubank and all that kind of stuff, because all these kids were starting to learn music in schools, and they needed everybody to be on the same page, so to speak. So it was getting a product out, as opposed to having a singing background and learning how to sing everything first, not necessarily looking at music, but just singing and hearing and all that kind of thing. And then getting into, learning instruments through singing and imitating your singing. So there's that component. There's also the pressure from school administrators and their thought that music reading is the highest level of literacy, when it's not. It's music improvisation,
This is one of the elements we kind of inherit from Europe, or we brought here from Europe, and it's this idea of literacy as the highest achievement for a musician, which is really not realistic in our music. It's sort of like it's putting everything upside down in terms of values, you know. Not to say literacy is not important. I think it's super important, but not at the expense of all of the things that make us a jazz musician. You know, I mean, look at the question you were asking me at the beginning of the interview. How do I write this song? I'm not going to tell you harmonically because I wasn't even thinking that way. You know, I mean, I can go analyze it and I know where everything fits, you know. And actually, I felt at one point that actually I had to leave a lot of space for freedom because I didn't want to put, you know, I wanted to even make it even more, having more resonance with a certain visual or emotional state. And so I'm thinking, again, I don't want to be misconstrued because I'm a director of an important program. And I do feel like all literacy, theory, harmony, history, all of that, it's necessarily training, but it should not be put first than having an experience with sound, and that is kinesthetic and it's oral and it's vocal and it's based on dance and movement.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And based on my own experience and me also being upset with how I was taught, and I can't be angry at those teachers because of the pressures that they were put under and also their own beliefs, because many people the majority of the people in the world believe that you need to read music, you know, and that's a belief that, you know, we have to counter with, you know, with what really goes on. And yeah,
I think we need to read music. I mean, I'm not saying that's not important.
I'm not either, but I think we need to experience, like you're just saying, we need to experience first. Yeah. And then in order to understand what you're reading, just like when you learn your native language, you had to have someone speak to you for many years in order for you to understand, oh, that word what, that's what I've been hearing for years, and that's what that looks like. Okay, so now when I read a book, my inner voice in my head is speaking and it's saying these words. Yeah, it's just the first experiences that needed to have happened or can happen for those people that, you know, certainly take up an instrument later on in life. You know, make it an oral experience first, and then bring the reading and the analysis and all that kind of stuff afterwards.
And to add another layer of that, you know, remember when I was telling you about community values, right? And we say individuality and creativity, and it's funny, you know, how a lot of programs, you know, they make you go through this rigorous learning, you know, of the techniques and the harmony and blah, blah, blah. And then one day they put it on stage and they say, okay, now please be creative. And it's wait a second. What? Like, how do you all of a sudden expect me, like you shove all this information in my brain and then put me on stage and say, now be creative. It's like, wait a second. Creativity is also a value that needs to be taught. You need to be exposed. It needs to be an integral part of what you're teaching. You cannot disconnect and then all of a sudden ask your student to be creative if you never asked them before from the beginning. So this idea that you cannot be creative unless you have accumulated all this information, that's not that, you know. If you don't know this, please watch it tonight. For all of you listening, Ken Robinson is a TED Talk. Does School Kill Creativity? Does School Kill Creativity? Watch it. It's on YouTube. Ken Robinson, I think is the name, is his English, amazing speaker. And he talks about his contention is like, we are all born creative. Kids are all creative, and we are educated out of creativity in schools. And to me, and he kind of like, he just kills it the way he explains it, and it's beautiful, right? And it's true. I think that schools, for a lot of the reason you were saying before, they really educate us out of creativity, and by stigmatizing mistakes, then make us even that's why this idea of the classical musician that is terrified to improvise, because he's terrified to make a mistake.
Yes.
know,
Oh my God. Yeah.
And we were talking about, this idea of mistake being sometimes actually quite important, into an expression that is, we were talking about Miles Davis and Irene Paz in my song. But I think that that's the other thing is like, we are not teaching community values of this music, and we need to. I'm not saying don't teach literacy, but introduce a different approach, and we need it. And we're doing it here. I don't know. I mean, we're really trying. We really.
And that's so awesome. And just as like wrapping up too, because this is also going full circle as well, just the fact that, you sharing like the process, what happened during the live performance and how it was terrifying. But yet it was magical at the same time, because it was true improvisation and true inspiration and all this, creativity happening. And then we got into a great discussion about how, creativity is kind of being beaten out of us when we're younger, and then we have to kind of retrieve it again later on. It's just really incredible. But let me ask this question too, so our listeners can find you. Where can they find you? And also, where can they buy your albums online?
When you say where they can find me to in person, you mean?
To learn more about you. And
okay. So, well, I do teach. I live in Boston, and I teach at Berklee College of Music, and I direct with Danilo Perez the Berklee Global Jazz Institute. So if you're in town, please hit me up. I always like to meet people. I have a website, www.marcopignataro.com. I should be a little more on top in actualizing it, but you can find a lot of material there. And in the last tab, you can find my picture and my poems that nobody cares about, but this lady gave me this great idea, and so now I got an album out of it. And also I'm quite active on social media. More than I like to be honest. But I have an artist, Marco Pignataro account, and then I have a personal account for friends and family, and then I have my poem and picture account, which is called Simple Dream. But if you go to Marco Pignataro on Instagram, you'll find all my other accounts are over there.
Okay, great. That's good to know. And Simple Dream accounts for poems.
My CDs are they're all like my last CDs are. I got it over here. So this is the last one. It is a Chant for Our Planet, and this is Awakening that came out in April. This is with Kenny Werner, Nadia Washington, Devon Gates. This is with John Paritucci, Terlin Carrington, Chico Pinheiro, Joe Lovano, Nadia Washington, Anastasia Petrova. And then the first one for Zoe was Almas Antiguas. Actually, they had a very beautiful reception from Downbeat, given like 4 stars. And this was with Danny Gomez, Alan Pasqua, George Garzon, amazing. If you don't know Garzon, I mean, you please check it out. George Garzon is one of the most incredible saxophone player alive, and Adam Cruz. So these are all Zoe records. That's the label, and you can find them online, or you can find them as a CD if you need, a coaster to put your key, because now nobody has CD anymore. I don't know why we keep on doing them. I don't know why we keep on doing that. It's like, if you give this to a student, it's like, oh, what is this? It's like this. Oh, that's the CD. Yeah, well, I'm gonna check you out online.
I know. I hate that though. I mean, I'm staring at only a big part of my CD collection. I have another part like that's shoved under beds because there's no room in LA houses. So I have all my CDs, and then those of us that grew up with LPs, vinyl and stuff like that. I mean, people are starting to know what that is. They can still appreciate that. But I'm a little old school. I'd rather have a CD. I get it though. I do check out people online, but yeah, I hear you.
Donna, my suggestion is to keep this for yourself because you're not looking enough for people. Don't give away your age. You can fool them. You know what I'm saying?
You're awesome.
Don't keep this for yourself. Don't let them know that you feel that way. I know, I did the same. I need to have an object in my head when I listen to music. I like to read I will read all the liner notes like nobody, like nowhere, all the musicians that are playing, like, but we grew up with that.
Yeah, I know. That's one thing that really stinks when you check out things online. You don't get all that information. That's annoying.
It's so annoying. You never know what you're listening to. I mean, you may know the main artist, but then it's like, who's playing drums? Well, it's like, man.
Yeah. Oh my God, so frustrating.
Let's cut this part of the podcast because they're gonna say, okay, they're old. You see, look.
Oh, I don't care. Then they're gonna think, oh, I'm missing out on that. Maybe I should get on board with them.
Yeah.
That's what I want to think. Well, listen, Marco, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. And this was so incredible. I want to encourage anybody that's listening, please share this because I truly think that this is not just for saxophone players. This is for all musicians and teachers because the conversations that we had, throughout, but especially at the end with regard to, how to further music in general and how to have your students have real success and real understanding, a depth of understanding of music. I think this conversation could be a good starter piece for that for sure.
I agree. And I feel like it's something that we need to spread as much as possible. This is not just opinion based. There's so much research about this. I mean, it's ridiculous how much research there is. And we are not paying any attention to it.
Yeah. I know, to the detriment of music.
Music education and music, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Donna. Thank you for the invitation.